Welcome to the Operations Science Podcast, where the art and science of operational excellence come to life through captivating stories of triumph, challenge, and transformation from the front lines of industry. Our distinguished guests, from manufacturing pioneers and medical device innovators to aerospace visionaries, diagnostic lab leaders, and major capital project leaders, unveil the hidden patterns and powerful insights that drive exceptional results in the complex world of operations. Join us on this journey of discovery as we explore the brilliant minds behind the systems that make our world work and uncover the leadership secrets that could revolutionize your approach to operations forever. Here is your host, Ed Pound.
Welcome to the Operations Science Podcast. The opinions expressed by our guests are their own and are not meant to represent their company's positions unless specifically stated otherwise. Now, imagine you've been in a serious accident. You've had head trauma, brain swelling. The situation is urgent. Doctors are racing to prevent permanent damage, so they insert a brain shunt. There is a happy ending. The procedure works fantastically, and you recover to full health. You're very thankful for the doctors and nurses that saw you through. What about the people who made the brain shunt? Today's guest is one of those people. He's a seasoned operations leader at Flexon, a $100 million revenue division of Ingersoll Rand company. Flexon makes the rubber and silicone components found in critical medical devices, brain shunts, pacemakers, and more. Our guest manages operations across 2 sites, overseeing 190 people, generating approximately $40 million of business. So good operations management experience. With 10 years of experience in manufacturing, he brings the mindset of a coach and a competitor. He's a chess coach, wrestling coach, and a dedicated father of 3. His unique approach blends personal growth, team development, and sharp operational thinking. Let's dive into operations management with Frankie Swindell. Hey, Frankie, how's it going?
Hey, Ed. Great to see you. Appreciate that introduction.
Sir, thanks for joining us. And it's well earned. So let's just dive right in. Current events are driving a lot of decision-making in manufacturing, particularly in the area of tariffs. How have the tariffs affected your business at Flexon, and how do they affect what you do as a manager, and what are you doing about it?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so the tariffs are definitely impacting all of Flexan. We're a global organization. We actually have a site in Suzhou, China, so definitely impacted by the current tariffs, 145%. Seems like as early as this morning, some of that may be changing. So very fluid situation. In terms of our business, this is something that I don't want to say we prepared for, but we've got experience through years of dual sites. Our Lincolnshire and Chicago sites are our silicone and rubber for North America. We also have our Suzhou site for the Asia markets, and then geographically sell across the world as well. And then with COVID, we saw a disruption of the supply chains where this resulted in a lot of alternate materials being provided or sourced, alternate suppliers, looking at different ways to create redundant capacity as risk mitigation. So actively, we are addressing for our customers' needs, what's the most economically feasible location for the materials to be provided. But we've also seen the silver lining in the disruption of the market is we've got world-class facilities in North America, in Illinois, that we have excess capacity where if people are having a hard time with this tariff situation, we have the technology, the people, the raw materials to be a very quick stopgap and ideally a long-term solution. As being an adaptable company is one of the main things you can do in order to win more business.
Wow, it sounds like there were some unintended positive benefits from COVID with the increased dispersion of your supply base, and that has prepared you for these tariffs. Very interesting.
Yeah, I would put it along the lines of, I think it was Winston Churchill that said, let no crisis go to waste. So we're just learning from these challenges. You put risk mitigation, some anti-fragility in your supply chain, and then the next interruption has less of an impact.
That's a fundamental operation science principle, is that parallel capacity reduces the effects of variability. So works on a global scale as well as the factory scale. So good work there. So Flexan went from a private equity ownership to being part of Ingersoll Rand, and that was just last year, right?
Correct.
Yeah, so how has that transformation influenced your role and your priorities as an operations manager?
Yeah, absolutely. Different business models. Private equity is quicker turn. They're looking for a return on within 3 to 5 years. So you're seeing projects, capital expenses, investments that have to have a quick ROI. They're also looking at, from a margin improvement standpoint, cost reductions, as well as price increases that have to be hit in order for it to be a good multiple for the company to be sold after 3 to 5 years. Publicly traded companies like Ingersoll Rand also are looking for margin expansion improvement, but it's a longer time horizon. We're talking about 5, 10, 20-year relationships with customers. We're talking about sustainable growth, not something where we're doing a quick change and then passing it on to the next owners to have to do the long-term adjustments. So we're seeing stability from that standpoint, from a capital standpoint. Day-to-day operations are very similar. Our relationships with customers have improved from the standpoint of, again, being publicly traded. There's the stability there, and also just access to capital. We're able to, at a $100 million company, adapt quickly. We're not so large that we're steering a huge ship to change the operations of the company, but we've got the financial backing of a large public company that when there is opportunities for growth, for investment, for capital, we're able to get that, as well as the global procurement and supply chain that Ingersoll Rand has provided to us. So that is something that definitely helps in the current tariff situation.
Yeah, so then you get pulled into Ingersoll Rand, and I assume that means that you can use, if they have them, as you mentioned, global procurement contracts, right, where they negotiated at a corporate level?
Correct. Yep. So the corporate contracts, logistics, all of that is something that we're able to leverage. It's a great benefit as a CMO to our customers to say, now we've got a $7 billion company that's backing you. We've seen it happen during COVID when there was raw materials that couldn't be sourced in an allocation. The larger your company is, the more spend, the more critical the application, the better ability you are able to source those materials. So this is just compounding for us internally that we're able to better service our customers.
Okay, so any changes on the sort of the operations floor level, the way you do planning and scheduling, managing your people as part of the transformation?
Not particularly. Most of it has been a great transition being part of Ingersoll Rand. We're getting the best practices, their reach. There is operational excellence stuff that we're starting the best practice, but nothing from a day-to-day operations that we're seeing major changes. It's the blocking and tackling of a good company, getting raw materials, addressing capacity, inventory, safety, quality, delivery. Those things don't go away just because you go from public to private or vice versa. So from that standpoint, very similar to before.
So along those lines, then, sticking with the factory floor topic, what do you do in terms of establishing a framework for your people to work in to maintain good performance and then identify improvement opportunities?
Yeah, I think it starts with standards and expectations. I think my belief is that everyone comes to work expecting to do a good job. You're looking for mastery, autonomy, and purpose in your job. So if people understand standard work, here's the expectations, they'll rise to the expectation. It also creates good flow within the site. And then obviously when you got good standards, you can see variability in what's special cause versus common cause. So I think that is something definite that we're working through. And then also, I'm big on educating the site, learning from other departments, supply chain, finance, quality, learning to speak other people's languages, seeing where their constraints are, and how do they create tools that not only service your department, but from a global standpoint, have the maximum throughput. And you only get that by talking to other people, by working with other departments, by stepping into their shoes and speaking their language.
Absolutely. So what are you seeing as your biggest challenges these days?
Biggest challenge is, I think it's right now we're trying to do some transformation work on the floor at multiple sites, and it's the second order, third order consequences of what seems like a good initiative, but has the unintended side effect of downstream operations being impacted. So for example, when you go through an initiative to maybe burn down WIP or drive down inventory, it has the unintended side effect of now we're having an OTIF issue, or we're starving a downstream or upstream operation from having enough throughput because there's just nothing for them to work on. So it's getting the leadership team, but also the people doing this day-to-day work to understand what's the second order and third order consequences of these actions, because everyone does their job, they're meeting the standard work, they're doing what the expectation is, but then the result at the end is not matching up to what we thought. And it's getting a culture of understanding, okay, that's a gap in understanding of how we work. Let's correct our understanding. Our hypothesis was wrong. Now just rinse and repeat. It's not an indictment on the team. It's the scientific method. That's how you learn.
Yeah, that's a great application for operations science. Absolutely. So when you're going through that process, have you identified, Danaher is famous for the Danaher business system.
Mm-hmm.
They're a Flexon equivalent?
No, not at this point. We're still developing some of those tools and what our standard work is from that standpoint. We've gone through multiple Kaizen events, looking at different departments, reorganizing how different departments work, but not a formalized system. We're still in the infancy stage of that. But over the next 2 to 3 years, that's something we're working to really establish.
Okay. All right. I mentioned in the intro that you're a chess coach and a wrestling coach. How is that your experience in those areas influenced how you work and your leadership with your organization?
Good question. I look at relationships primarily as a coach-athlete relationship, and that's just my upbringing being in chess, wrestling, football, basketball, all the sports. It's understanding how to take critical feedback, not from an indictment on the individual, but this is a gap in performance, and how do we close the gap? And so sometimes it's difficult for new managers or leaders to have those difficult conversations because I've got 20 years of experience on the coaching side of telling people, hey, you made a mistake. You want to reach this level of performance. Here's where I see room for improvement. And it's just a feedback loop. And you have to be able to have a good person who's on the recipient side that understands how to take that feedback. And that goes for me as well. I'm not in any relationship, even if it's the dynamic of it's a direct report to me. There are plenty of instances throughout the day where I am the athlete in that circumstance. They know better than I do about their department. I have to come from a humble background saying, your stuff better than me. Here's where I see gaps. And oftentimes it's just asking good questions. I think good coaches tell people what to do. Great coaches ask the questions to enable a good athlete or a good employee to solve their own problems. It's to coach them, to give them the learning opportunities, not just go out there and do this. It's here's why this is important, giving them the background and just being very cool.
So how does that contrast then? Some thoughts on how that contrasts with providing people standard work? Because the reaction might be like, oh, I just have to do the standard work and I don't have to think.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think you have to always balance that with an ownership mindset. So this is something that Ingersoll Rand has, one of their foundational values. It's a core value of everyone has to treat that as an owner, right? It's the job's got to get done. It's here's the work, but how do we continue to do better? How do we continue to improve? Standard work is great, but you have to balance standard work with constant and never-ending improvement. You want to create an environment, I guess, similar to athletes too. Here's your practice routine. Here's the fundamentals we start with, but that's not the end. The expectation is part of the athlete or the employee is what are the next steps in order for me to become better at my job? What are the other departments I have to work with to make this more of a global optimum as opposed to a local optimum? So that's the hard balance of you don't want to be so rigid when you only give people standard work and you blindly follow it. You have to acknowledge that people want autonomy, purpose, and mastery. They have to have a sense of ownership that they're going to continue to improve on the standard, not just follow the standard.
Yeah, I think that's good insight. There is always that trade-off in terms of you want people to follow a certain standard and play within the rules of the game, so to speak, but there's certainly some adaptability within that. So you mentioned a term, I think you said OTF?
Yep, on time in full.
On time in full. So basically that's your customer service
Correct.
Delivery metric. And so when you're looking at metrics, what do you look at? I'm sure you mentioned cost, quality, and delivery. Is there any particular way that you guys have insight into that? You think maybe give you an advantage?
I don't know if it's an advantage. I think it's it's just standard works, safety, quality, delivery, cost. Safety, we're looking at the number of safety concerns that we report on a daily basis or a monthly basis, trying to get a safe environment for our employees. The expectation is employees come to work happy and healthy, and they leave happy and healthy and enriched by their work. So it starts there. From a quality standpoint, we're checking DPPM, non-conformances, both internal as well as customer complaints or feedback. From a OTIF standpoint, I think this is something that is always the factory physics book did a good job for me of put it into a very clear form of your OTIF, your inventory levels, your capacity. Those are all metrics that are tied to one another. So there's often a case during the budgeting process where you want to say, I want to have the minimum amount of OTIF, the minimum amount of overhead or capacity, but I want to have 100% OTIF. Well, those are metrics that don't align. So it's understanding the trade-offs and getting to that good level of 95, 98% OTIF requires X amount of capacity, which also may require X inventory, and you play with those buffers. I won't say that we've got an advantage on it. It's something that just based off these principles that we're trying to incorporate into our site of, are we creating an environment and metrics that we can win at, or are we creating metrics where you want 100% OTIF and no inventory? You can't have those two. You have to have some sort of a countermeasure to balance them.
Right. Yeah. Oh, just to clarify, my book, my co-author's book was Factory Physics for Managers, is the Bible, so to speak, 700-page textbook. But yeah, absolutely, those concepts apply, and there is that realization, or we hope, and that's the mission of the Operation Science Institute, is this realization that there is this interaction between capacity and inventory and time and variability, which ties directly to the bottom line. And along that particular topic of discussion, you mentioned working with different departments like finance. And so I'm curious in terms of, is your discussions with finance, a lot of times it's a bunch of headbutting, them saying, don't spend so much money. And you're saying, I need this much money to do what I need to do. And you talk past each other, or have you established that the common framework would allow you both to work on the same problem in the same way?
Yep, and I think this goes back to the making sure everyone can speak other people's languages. So you have to be able to you want specialists who are fantastic at their standard work and their core function, whether it's finance, supply chain, operations. But I also believe you need communication and that general adaptability to, I can step into a finance meeting and speak finance to them for the meeting. I could jump into a supply chain meeting and speak supply chain or quality. So we've done a good job partnering with our finance team and our plant controller that they understand operations well enough that when we're coming to them with these financial questions or requests for capital or an explanation as to why I need a little bit more inventory in order to keep my OTIF where we need to hit, they're understanding that. But also I have to come to the table and understand we have a formal budgeting process. There are metrics that we have to meet. And there, from an operations standpoint, I understand where the finance, my partner, is coming from. So it's a fluid conversation, but it's definitely something that I see my role as an operations manager, or just more as a person in general. It's just an integrator between people. How do I create bridges between departments? How do I create relationships that are cross-functional so that we're not talking over each other? We're talking at two different sides of the same coin, but to get to the same solution. Because at the end of the day, operations is trying to keep customers happy and make money. Finance is making sure we're doing that in a financially reasonable way and putting appropriate controls in place.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a group effort, and having a common language, particularly the one that's based in science and it's not a matter of opinion, helps to facilitate that. So when you're looking at OTIF, a lot of times a challenge for people, so you have, having seen your facility, you have resources, you have parallel resources, you have different products going across shared resources, which can be a very complex problem in terms of scheduling. Are any particular takeaways or challenges with scheduling the shop?
Yeah, so I think you're referring to some of our labor force. We've done a great job over the last few years of cross-training people across different departments, whether it be inspectors into molding or molding into extrusion operators or into packaging. So from an operations standpoint, very flexible. From an ERP planning standpoint, calculators don't like flexibility. They like rigidity. They want to know exactly where stuff is. So that's where it comes from, the operations side. How do we create these tools that are WIP tracking? We use WIP tracking in terms of work orders and hours and saying, okay, here's where we're reaching a control limit. We've got too many people in this specific department. This department needs a little bit of help and support, so we shift them appropriately. And that's how we've been partnering from an ops side with the production planning side of, here's how we're able to adjust our labor to meet the needs.
Along those lines, you mentioned ERP, which is both a blessing and a curse in a lot of environments. Are you using, because ERP will generate schedules down to the minutest detail if you wanted to do that. Are you using the ERP scheduling approach, or is that basically an input into what your production schedule becomes?
Yeah, different sites have slightly different ways that we've done this, but it is the ERP systems creating the schedule, and then our production planners are then massaging the data in order to make it match with the capacity we have on the floor. A lot of ERPs assume infinite capacity, or you roll the MRP the next day and it changes the whole production plan. The floor can't change as quickly as a computer can. So then there's the give and takes of, okay, here's the inputs. It's a supercomputer, right? This is similar to Minitab, Excel, SolidWorks, all these softwares. They're very sophisticated softwares, but they require a certain level of intelligence as well as understanding of the outputs in order for you to be able to respond to it. So that is the fine line of, here's what the ERP said. Here are my guard bands to double check the ERP, as well as here's where we maybe create something outside the ERP. So we've blended all of them. We are trying as much as possible to put the stuff into our ERP. That way we're not making tools outside the system, but there's always a level of complexity and that it gets hidden in a supercomputer like that.
It's interesting. I literally just made a comment on LinkedIn today about somebody talked about, oh, we need to get perfect data, right, before we can make a decision. Of course, that's a non-starter because you'll never have perfect data. The other thing, which you just touched on with your comment, is this idea that, oh, if we have more data and more data faster, that makes for better control. You hit the nail on the head when you said, look, MRP can regenerate, or ERP, the kernel of which is MRP, can regenerate every day, but you can't respond to that. And I've actually heard of places that regenerate the MRP once an hour. And you just wonder, what are people thinking?
Yeah, I think it's a false sense of, I think the book is key performance indicators. There's a line in it that refers to that we are now bathing in data, but thirsting for information, or something to that effect, where we assume more and more information. You end up getting diminishing returns. It ends up being too much for individuals to comprehend and adapt. You can run all these reports to your point, every single hour, but is the information actionable, or is it too much and okay, we'll just wait till tomorrow because I can't digest all this information? And especially when we're creating production schedules downstream, you shouldn't be adjusting that quickly because there's inherent variability within the process that will just 1 hour later retract what the new proposal was. So I think that's another thing, again, in the Factory Physics for Manager book, the variability and understanding that's an inherent. ERPs do not like that. It's very difficult to calculate the statistical variation within processes. Multi-step router that has multiple components and materials, it's a non-solvable problem, and I feel like sometimes in the industry we assume more data, better calculators will get us to a better solution, but the solution changes the minute you see the answer. It's going to change the next minute when you rerun it.
Yeah, absolutely. Very early on, as a very young engineer coming out of college, I thought, oh yeah, we're just going to create the perfect solution, particularly if you're looking at production scheduling on what to do and when, and then you realize, as you've just described very well, that it's basically an impossible task with all the complexity and the fact that you can't react as quickly. What you end up coming up with, and actually we've got a new book coming out called Operations Science Applied, and the idea is we talk about a performance envelope. So you have to assume some range of variability in demand and some range of variability in your transformation or in your supply. And then once you do that, you can set up your system so it will manage variability within those parameters. And then the day-to-day change stuff, that's why you have people out on the floor with a computer between their brains. They handle all that stuff.
Yeah.
Like you mentioned with your planning folks, but so many have this mental model of just feed the information into the computer and it'll just do everything for me. Just doesn't jive with weight.
And what I typically tell people, either when it's frustrations with the ERP or operations isn't realizing the outcome we'd expect from the production planning, or sometimes people get frustrated with planning saying, hey, why didn't the plan work? I often ask people, okay, how long was your commute today to work? And was it accurate? Was there any variation in that? My schedule for today, I had planned out yesterday. Within 5 minutes, my whole schedule is blown. So like this variation occurs instantaneously on a single person scale. Now put it across the whole organization. That's why you have buffers and capacity to address that. You can't expect perfection.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that concept of getting people to understand that variability happens, and the key is understanding how to deal with it. And the most effective way is to decide the range of variability you're going to accommodate, and then understanding the relationships between capacity and variability, inventory and time, then set up your system to manage that. And so some people will get that. And then what happens is you get a spike in demand outside of what you'd assumed. And then everybody is just a fire drill. Oh my gosh, what are we going to do? And so you can either tolerate the inefficiencies that occur because you didn't plan for that, or you have to replan. I'm not sure in terms of answering those questions, is there an overall sales and operations planning process that you go through with your sales folks to say, look, these are the ranges of demand we're going to handle?
Yeah, we've got a SIOP process that we've established that's continuing to evolve, and that's something that, and this is, it's always, for me, it's post-COVID. When did things become normal again? It was pre-COVID, then post-COVID, then inventory development. There's the range. I think your performance envelope model is great. I think that is something that people have to understand when you set up your system. What are the outcomes you're willing to tolerate? And then equally important is if it's outside the outcome, you have to understand your model wasn't supposed to solve that problem. And that's okay. And that's the trade-off. So similar going back to maybe like OTIF, if we say our goal is 95% and we have a few shipments that miss, are we overreacting on the two that missed and we're still at 98%? Or is that a normal byproduct of the system? Don't analyze noise. This was what we signed up for. And that is something that you got to balance the cost of keeping the capacity in inventory, but also when demand comes up, you want to be able to capitalize on it. And that's just an ongoing conversation that all businesses work through.
Yeah, that idea. So if you say 95% OTIF, that means out of 100 orders, 5 of them are not going to be filled instantaneously, right? And so to your point, people shouldn't run around like the hair's on fire because you missed 5 orders. That's what you planned for.
Exactly.
So is there an understanding of that, though? You and I can talk about it, and we're familiar with it. But then when you go out into the wider organization, a lot of times it's like people, yeah, that's great. That makes me look bad if I'm the sales guy. And so I don't care that we plan for it. I'm still going to sound the fire alarm.
Yeah, I think it's continuous in education across the sites. I think you're always going to have multiple stakeholders. Customer wants 100% OTIF for all of their parts, right? So there's the expectation that we continue to drive towards that. You've got the internal stakeholders of if we're setting people up for, and hypothetically, 95 or 98% OTIF, do they have the awareness of, yes, we want to achieve 100% OTIF. That's not a bad thing, but we maybe be from an inventory capacity guaranteeing 95. I think this again goes to my comment of how do you integrate multiple departments? How do you have that conversation? And how do you level with people? Because each person, again, is trying to do the best they can within the company. But how do you establish that relationship, those conversations? And we do it on a daily basis. There's a weekly review meeting. There's the monthly SIOP meeting where we're continuing to refine that feedback model of, I understand someone's upset or there's a metric that we missed. My job is operations managers. Okay, did we sign up for this, or was this something we should have solved internally? And if we signed up for it, to your point, do we have to replan capacity and inventory or time, our lead times, or no, that's okay. This is what the expectation is, and we'll continue to refine the process. But it's a constant and never-ending improvement, and constant and never-ending improvement relationships as well.
I remember when I first came to visit you, and that was when Flexan was owned by a private equity company.
Correct.
There was always this debate about swinging because a lot of your capacity is labor. There's a lot of manual assembly that's done. And so there was a lot of conversation about PE guys want to keep costs down so we keep as little labor as possible, but then you want to realize revenue when it comes, and it takes time to bring people online. I think you said maybe 4 months was.
It depends on the department, 3, 6, 9 months, depending on the complexity. Being a medical device, these are precision parts that are going into your brain, your heart, your spine. So there's science and art.
I want those to be precise. Okay.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you get that same sort of pressure with Ingersoll Rand as a public company? It sounds like maybe not, if they're looking long term.
Not to the same extent. I think it's the same question. How do you maximize profit without leaving revenue on the table? And then how do you communicate that appropriately? It's not, I think one of the other challenges I'm still working through is the assumption in your cycle time to your capacity model is that once you reach 100% capacity, your cycle time goes through the roof, which the implied answer to that is you need to have excess capacity, but no one wants to see excess capacity. If you say we want 90% capacity on a press, that implies 1 out of 10 people is not doing anything, but that is part of the capacity buffer. So that again goes to your question about communicating with the finance team. It's here's the trade-offs. Here's my job as an operations manager is to maximize profit and OTIF for our customers. as well as ourselves. So then how do I do a good job from an inventory, WIP, and capacity standpoint to, again, create the system that has the intended outcome?
Yeah, that is another great point you hit on. So I say my resource, press or whatever it is, 90% utilized. Well, what that means is that I have a 10% capacity buffer to manage variability. But what it also means that tends to drive managers crazy who don't understand that is they walk out there and 10% of the time, nothing's going on. And so the implication is that, oh, people are lazy and somebody's out smoking a cigarette somewhere. No, that's what you plan for, that for the variability that you want to manage. And depending on the level of variability, heck, some businesses, it's 50% utilization. So half the time you walk out there, but they can respond really quickly. If you look at an ambulance, I think their utilization level is 10%, but you don't want to call up the ambulance service and they go, yeah, we're really busy right now. I can schedule for pickup tomorrow. So it's interesting trying to get people to change their mental models to understand that. But there's gold in them dar hills if you can.
Yeah, and that goes to kind of Eli Goldratt. There's the whole cost accounting and how there's all the stuff around that, because you want to maximize all of your resources to the fullest extent. But excess capacity is not maximizing a resource then. But at the same time, if you fully maximize a resource to 100% and the press goes down, okay, now I just lost all that time. I can never recover. So it's one thing to say it in a conversation like this. It's another thing when there's table stakes.
That's right.
We all signed up for this, and the financials, the operations, KPIs should reflect that.
Yeah, and you want to set it up in a framework so that it's completely predictable. Nobody is burning up the phone lines just because a press goes down. That's not outside of our performance envelope that we planned for. So we might have a temporary setback, but going long term, we don't have to worry about we're going to lose customers. Along those lines, let's switch to talking about customers. Do you, and actually suppliers, so basically outside of the factory, do you work directly with customers on implementing solutions? Is that handled through a different organization?
Yep. So for most of it, it is through me. We've got our key account managers and our customer service that also works through that. We've got engineers working through kind of value stream with our customers, but I'm very much on the forefront of those conversations where we're seeing supply demand discrepancies. We're working through a lot of our suppliers, right? Customers went through this with COVID. They went through this now with the tariffs. It's how do we create, again, solutions that are beyond just the four walls of this building that also extend to our customers. So I keep referring to the local versus the global maxima. Each department tries to do what's best for them, but you really want to do what's best for the company. Sometimes what's best for the company in working downstream with our suppliers as well as with our customers is how do we make that whole value stream align with the variability, the capacity, the performance envelope? How do you create a culture that from raw material to finished good or implanted into a patient, everyone's got the same capacity buffers or inventory. We're all beating the same drum. That's the challenge is, again, being an integrator, developing those relationships because everyone's in the same boat. You don't want to hold excess inventory, but you also can't ask a supplier, if we're all saying we're holding no inventory, I can't get parts tomorrow. There's a lead time.
Right.
And everyone's got to balance that.
Yep. So along those lines, when we talk about customers, a lot of times for operations managers such as yourself, your customer is going to be, for instance, a buyer for not for Ingersoll Rand, for your external customers. It'll be a buyer. So you'll say the idea being that customers always want 100% OTF. Okay. But really, do they need it 100% of the time? Mm-hmm. And then what happens is the buyer, because the buyer just gets measured that way, is going to insist on 100% because that's how the buyer is measured, not that you actually need that product on that day. You could wait a couple of days. You could split up some shipments. Do you have those kind of discussions with your customers?
That's a good point. No, we haven't had that level of discussion. Usually it's informal. Okay, this order is going to be late. How are you doing on your inventory? I'd say probably 9 times out of 10, no impact. It's no big deal. No, we've got buffer there. But that's, again, I think the KPIs drive behaviors that may not be optimal for everyone. Similar to with my background in engineering, engineers have a tendency to overspec designs. So they put a lot of critical features on this, and then Makes it very hard from a validation standpoint. You're trying to actually figure out, does this have any functional impact, any form impact? Oftentimes the answer is no. So then you have to peel back the requirements, which from an engineering standpoint, it's on the drawing. Is there too much critical features and too tight of tolerances that aren't actually important or not as important as the engineer may believe? And then same thing on the buyer side. Is their operation set up where they require 100% OTIF? Or if we were only meeting 70%, they would see no impact. They've got enough buffer inventory lead times that we're just having escalation calls for escalation call purposes, not because of material impact.
Yeah, and we could all spend our time more wisely. Yeah. Sure. Along those lines, do you typically get a window for delivery, 0 days early, 3 days late, or something like that?
It depends on the customer. We've worked with a lot of customers to put them on Kanban. So there's min-max levels and all, because we stay in that range, and they provide updates to what their forecast or their new bin levels are. Discrete POs depends on the customer as well. Plus or minus 3 days, plus or minus 5 days, plus 0, minus 5, that kind of stuff. Plus or minus a week. Obviously, we're trying to get as close as possible to the date, but there's variation.
Yeah. Sure. Yeah. Sure. But that provides you some buffer, because that's a time buffer that you can then play with, which can help. And if it doesn't affect anybody, so what?
Exactly.
So let's switch to another very, very current topic, which is artificial intelligence. Talk about what you're seeing in terms of artificial intelligence is applied to your job, and maybe where that might go in the near future.
Yeah, good question. I think artificial intelligence is getting thrown around a lot right now. Haven't seen as much tangible impact. I think people are tinkering with some stuff. We're seeing it from a documentation standpoint, a processing standpoint. We're experimenting with it from a vision system standpoint for looking for defects, how to do that. We've also seen some incorporation of trying to use it for supply chain to do some more essentially ERP with an AI overhead on top of it. So one of those, we're kicking the tires on it, seeing where it's got the most leverage, but also not trying to recreate, not to use a tool that we don't actually need to have. So I think we're doing a good job of doing due diligence, especially on the documentation side. This is a lot of non-value add to the customer. They expect good parts and then all the documents are done. When you got GDP, GMP, you got to make sure that all the forms are filled out correctly. Having a person read a form is non-value add to your customer. Is there an opportunity for a computer to do this, AI? These are the kind of things that I think short term we'll see tangible impact pretty immediately. And then on the inspection side, that's another thing we're exploring. The difficulties with silicone is it's transparent and reflective. So cameras and lighting are not great. So that is something where artificial intelligence, creating that library, especially over the last 2 years, we've seen big improvements in both the camera side and the artificial intelligence. So I think we're on the cusp of some of that stuff becoming commonplace.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, it's the Wild West right now. Everybody's trying to figure it out. But I'm hearing similar things from other folks. The immediate thing is documentation, because it can write stuff for you very quickly. Typically, my experience is I don't take what it's written and just immediately turn and post that. You got a lot of, you make sure you got to check, but certainly helps to generate ideas. It's always easier to edit than it is to compose. And so it helps in that regard.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think from a brainstorming standpoint, kicking off ideation, it's a good first pass, a sounding board. I use it every once in a while for, okay, here's, if I want to improve something, I'll talk to the computer for a little bit and then get some feedback and refine my thinking. So the next few years will be very interesting as that takes off.
Yeah, I completely agree. It's going to be interesting. All right, let's switch topics and get out of the professional and talk about the personal. A little bit of background about you. So what was Frankie Swindell as a kid? Where did you grow up? How many siblings do you have? Where are you in that order?
Got it.
Who ruled the roost?
I grew up in Grayslake, Illinois, so about an hour outside of Chicago. I'm the second oldest of 7 kids. Got 4 sisters, 3 brothers. My mom was a teacher for first grade. She was also a gym teacher for a little bit as well. My dad has been teaching chess for 30 years. That's what his profession was. Before that, he did some entrepreneurial activities. But when my sister was in kindergarten, I was in preschool. He kicked off the chess club program at the school. 74 kids showed up the first day, and from then on, that's where his career's been. So that's where my chess background comes from.
Wow. So I'm sure you've seen the Queen's Gambit, right?
Absolutely. Yep.
So have you been going around to tournaments and participating?
I have not recently. So up until my sophomore year in high school, I played competitively, multiple state champion. I was a national champion. High school, I got into wrestling because my dad wrestled, and state for wrestling and state for chess was the same day. So at that point in my career, I said, okay, I'll start moving over to wrestling. I've done the chess thing for long enough. I was a little bit tired after doing it for 13 years. So I still play online. I'm still competitive in that standpoint, but I don't go to tournaments anymore. I ended up helping my dad teach some class and then moved into wrestling. Did wrestling in high school, then went on to college. We did it for 1 year at Georgia Tech through the club program. Then they closed the program down. And then when I graduated, I came back and coached at my high school where my younger two brothers were varsity wrestlers there.
Wow, that's fascinating. So how did you get into engineering and manufacturing?
Yeah. So junior year in high school, my dad had an aortic valve replacement as well as a spinal brace put into his back. And I immediately saw the impact that medical devices could have on individuals. I was more engineering inclined. I thought of maybe going down the doctor route. I have an uncle who's a doctor. Several aunts that are nurses, and my sisters are nurses as well. So I was medical on the engineering side, math and science inclined. I ended up going to Georgia Tech with my biomedical degree and got a minor in pre-med. While going through that, I ended up starting a company with two of my roommates called Better Walk, where we designed crutches for people when they break their legs or roll their ankle. Got a patent for that, went through an accelerator program, got some funding, realized how hard it was to sell to hospitals. So then I saw, okay, I still want to be in the medical device space. Doing a startup in the medical device space where I was in my career was difficult. We weren't making as much traction. So I said, I'll do the opposite. I'll go to a big company. I ended up going to Baxter, worked in their container engineering department for the IV bags. Really appreciated working at Baxter, saving and sustaining lives, but also saw a company that was a little bit too big for my take. It was a little slow. So I wanted to get more experience. Came to Flexan, immediately fell in love with the company, the product lines that we're serving, the size of the company. I was able to get a lot of experience, still be able to be in the medical device space, impacting lives, but at a very rapid pace, especially being private equity owned. Everything was very quick paced, but matches my demeanor. So that's how I got into engineering and then into operations.
Wow, that's interesting. What happened to the crutch business?
Yeah, so I ended up separating from the company. They got bought out. And then there's actually some pictures online. Actually, we did a presentation at the White House. The company got spun off into a athletic sock company. So that had more traction with the market than the crutches did. It was easier to sell to consumers that way. So they've continued the company. It's a big success in Atlanta right now.
Yeah. It's a different world being an entrepreneur, definitely. Along a little bit different line, still in the personal space, what are your favorite books or authors?
So I don't read much outside of the business, personal development, health standpoint. I do a lot of learning. I don't like reading about Harry Potter or stuff that I don't feel like I can make tangible impact to my life, which I probably need to go outside there. But Peter Drucker, I think all of his works are fantastic. Eli Goldratt with The Goal is another big one. Tim Ferriss is another person that I follow a lot in terms of personal developments as well as the company. Patrick Lencioni and all of his work on culture and teamwork. His book, The Motive, is one that I find fantastic for managers and leaders on but making sure it's not an ego reason why you got into management and leadership, that it's a servant position and you have to do that. I think, and there's another book called What Got You Here Won't Get You There. I believe it's by Marshall Goldsmith, something like that. But it's as you move up in a company, you tend to move up because you're very good at what you do. And then you reach a certain level in a company that what you are very good at can sometimes be the constraint for the company because you are solving all those problems. You need to solve the company's problems. It's not the stuff you really like doing. Here's the constraint of the business. So I find that fascinating. Finance books, personal, I think behavioral economics, mental models, Charlie Munger, across the board. It's something healthy, wealthy, wise relationship. Those are the things I kind of dive into.
That's great. Yeah, my dad used to have a saying was basically, like what you learn, don't only learn what you like. And that will serve you well because if you're always trying to do just what you want to do, you tend to stagnate. Any particular habits or mindsets or life hacks you have or swear by?
Nothing I swear by yet. This is something that I'm always adapting. I think planning ahead of schedule, right? Planning your day, before you leave, like the Ivy Lee method of what's the 6 things tomorrow I want to get done before 1, making sure you're moving your big rocks. I think one of the things I'm becoming better at over time is looking at my calendar and determining actually what needs to get done that week. There's a lot of requests on people in management and leadership, and then even in my personal life on, okay, I signed up to do this 2 weeks ago. Is this my top priority today? Do I need to be in this meeting? What's the value that's being provided? I think a core fundamental is being healthy. If you don't have your health, you have nothing else. Nutrition, workout plan, it's good for the mind, good for the body. And then making sure I'm big into positive constraints. I also subscribe to the theory of constraints from a business standpoint. How do we elevate a company by looking at its constraints? But I also look from a personal standpoint, the positive constraints. I'm a father with 3 young kids, 2, 4, and 6. I have a lovely wife. I want to make sure I spend time with them. I have to put constraints on my day to make sure all the big rocks are done by the time I leave the office. And that causes me to only work on the most important things. Pareto principle, Parkinson's law, 80-20, work on the important stuff and get it done as quick as you can, using those positive constraints.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. From an operations standpoint, that's just good capacity management. You can apply that in your life just as well as you can. That's the blessing and the curse of operations science. It applies everywhere. Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely.
Yeah. And that's a good thing too. I think I see too often people talk about maybe work-life balance or your professional versus your personal life. Your life is your life. Everything you do ties to everything else. How you behave in your personal life, those interactions, they have an influence. Breaking down those barriers and also just learning from a multidisciplinary approach. How do I take something from physics, from science, biology, economics, and apply it in my personal life and the business? There's always learning points, either for the audience you're going to talk to. Maybe that's a new way you can approach them, or it's a way that it can click inside your mind. You're not constrained to learning about finance through a financial lens. You can learn it through other ways.
So you say, you mentioned you've got a wife and 3 kids. What has family life and particularly maybe some insights that your kids have taught you?
Oh, it's a good one. Family insights. I think first and foremost, like just my wife is fantastic. I wouldn't be able to do anything I do, so I want to put a plug in for her there. I think
All right.
from the
Good. You did that. You can come home tonight.
Absolutely. From the kids' standpoint, I've learned a lot of it's going to sound maybe weird, but like how you approach other people, employees. We're all humans in this respect. So dealing with young children, you set routines, you set expectations. Kids will follow that extremely well. Once they know the routine, here's the time I wake up, here's the 5 things I do in the morning, I go to school, rinse and repeat. You talk to any parent with young kids, you deviate from that schedule, chaos breaks out. Very similar to within a company. When there's standard work and people know what to do, and they understand that routine and repetition, very good. Also learn from kids is expectations, accountability, and consequences. If I set the expectation and you don't do it, and I don't hold you accountable, there's no repercussions. They'll get away with whatever they can get away with. And employees, most of the time it's not through negligence or intent, but it's if no one's holding me, I don't have to fill out this report because no one's telling me I have to and there's no consequence. You stop filling out the report. You stop doing these things. Establishing standard work, it's holding the standard, and then understanding the human aspect of stuff. I think sometimes often you look at financial metrics or operational metrics and you go, okay, if people were working harder, if they're just doing this or that, but then you talk to people, same thing goes for our personal lives. You didn't sleep well, you got something going on, you got health issues, a family member, and those are the times you really got to step back as a leader and go, okay, this is not just numbers on a spreadsheet. We're talking about people and understanding that. And that's how you win hearts, you change minds, you develop a company that's sustainable, not just always on the bottom line. It's making sure you're taking care of the people that work with you.
Yeah, it's a complete picture. Definitely. It's not just about the numbers. But, that example about your kids and the routine and standard work, that's actually a great example. And people are hesitant to use that example because when you're talking to adults, you're like, oh, you're going to treat me like a kid. No, I'm not saying that. I'm just saying kids, if they're in a routine, if somebody's in a routine, their life tends to be less stressful. But even within that routine, you get up, you eat, you take your nap, you go to bed whenever, you still have a lot of creativity within that routine. So there's tons of things that you can do. And it's not like having a routine restricts you from being the best that you can be. As a matter of fact, it tends to increase your chances of doing that.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a great book by Jocko Willings. It's called Discipline is Freedom. And that's a big part of it is, and if you want to use kids, use athletes. You watch before a professional basketball game, football game, they're all going through the routine. It's mindless, but it's because they got the routine, they'll get the intended. If you don't do that, it's the fundamentals of getting the expected outcome. It's just going through the routines.
Yeah, definitely. Listen, Frankie, this has been a great conversation. Really appreciate all your insights and coming on the Operation Science podcast. We will have this put out on a lot of different channels. People could be looking for that all over the place on Apple, on Amazon Prime, all sorts of different sources. But it's been very interesting talking with you. Appreciate your insights and look forward to talking in the future.
Excellent. Appreciate it. It's been a great conversation. Look forward to it.
Thanks, Frankie.
Thanks.
The Operation Science podcast requires more than a conversation. It takes action, research, and collective wisdom. If today's episode resonated with you, we'd love to hear your insights. Join the conversation and help us shape the future together. Join the Operation Science Institute at opscience.org. We'll be back with more stories, strategies, and real-world solutions that are making a difference for everyone. In the meantime, be sure to subscribe, rate, write a review, and share it with someone you think would benefit from it too. Thanks for listening, and see you on the next episode. The views expressed by our guests are their own and do not represent their company's views unless specifically stated as such.